Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. John Whyte. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at WebMD. The last 2 years have been stressful, haven't they? We've seen behavioral issues. We've seen them in our kids, but we've also seen them in our colleagues, and that includes physicians. And you probably have met a physician in the past that maybe was rude to you or you felt too rushed. Is it getting worse? Well, Medscape put out a report to find out what the status is of misbehavior and physicians. The report is entitled Physicians Behaving Badly: Stress and Hardship Trigger Misconduct. We interviewed 1,500 physicians, and the most startling statistic, 41% said they have seen physicians behaving inappropriately in the workplace. Another 30% saw they've seen it on social media. And these are higher numbers than previous years. So helping me unpack it all and make sense of it is my good friend, Dr. Drew Ramsey. Dr. Ramsey is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
John, Dr. Whyte, it's great to be with you again. Thank you. And I think we should all thank WebMD for asking these questions. These are hard questions, but they're very important for us to look at as physicians, as a community, so we all keep improving.
Are you surprised by this data? Let's be real. We all know some colleagues, who aren't exactly, the best behaved. And this was pre-pandemic. We've known them. But these numbers I find somewhat striking when 40% of our colleagues are saying they've witnessed it. Does this surprise you? Can we say it's just due to the pandemic?
No, John, we can't say it's just due to the pandemic. I think we need to recognize that physicians, and I'm going to broaden that to healthcare providers in America and around the world, are dealing with a set of stressors and a level of trauma and a level of scrutiny that we just never have before. And so not only are we're more aware of bad behavior, but we're also dealing with so much right now that I think there is more of it. But I think we also need to really understand that for physicians watching this, who are part of this survey, who saw some of that behavior, that is your opportunity right now, today, this year, to grow as a physician.
Right. And to speak up, perhaps, if we're witnessing that. But you and I always like to look at data. So it begs the question, who defines bad behavior, right? Something that you and I may witness, we may think that's bad and rude. And someone else may say, well, I've seen worse. That's not so bad. Who's the referee of this all saying you were inappropriate and no, you were not inappropriate? Does it matter?
Well, it certainly matters for physicians within a setting, or if you move to a new institution, because cultures within institutions shift about what is appropriate. Some emergency rooms love to give Klonopin, others love to give Ativan. There are little differences. That also applies to how we think about interacting with colleagues, how some institutions think about gender, think about race. So it does matter that institutions are clear about that. I think even more important, and this is where our institutional leaders are really navigating something that's new, is how to have those conversations and keep those conversations happening in the workplace. I think about Jean Marie Alvis Bradford, who's at Columbia, who's really shepherding this process to think about race and think about equity within a department during a time of crisis. And so those are the leaders we want to be looking to as we think through, how do we have this conversation where we decide what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and how do we make sure that all voices are heard so the behavior just doesn't perpetuate. That's what medicine's been so guilty of.
So you're an expert in psychiatry. What do you think is the root of it when we're seeing it in physicians? Some people will say, and we reference it in the report, and you've commented in the report, that it's arrogance. Or no, actually, it's not arrogance, it's insecurity. That's the reason why doctors talk to people badly, or they misbehave when they're out in public. Is it arrogance or is it insecurity?
Well, it's a behavior for us to understand. Each individual is going to have some personal meaning to that. But in general, arrogance and narcissism is a defense and an expression of profound insecurity. If I need to dominate you, you're a nurse, you're a patient, and tell you exactly what's right, as opposed to partnering with you, meeting you where you are, understanding, of course, you have the lived experience and you have the key to health, which is changing your behavior. So we have to partner together. But yeah, I think that's from insecurity. You're a physician, John. What do you think? I mean, a psychiatrist, we love these explanations. It's that unconscious again. But what do you think?
I think you explained it well, that it's arrogance that's really reflecting insecurity, not for everyone, but for a large number of clinicians who, as you know, sometimes when you're not sure of an answer, if you say it, more vociferously and more boldly, people will assume it's true. And we know that's not the fact. Is any of this generational? When we asked about it in the report, the perpetrators of misbehavior were primarily in their 40s. And I put this in the context of, have social mores changed? So what might have been acceptable in theory 20 years ago is not acceptable now.
Good. Thank goodness. That's progress, John. And if we're edging on the side that we're maybe encroaching, calling out a little bit too much bad behavior, I think there's some notion, I think sometimes it's called wokeness in some way, that bothers me. I come from the Midwest. I've been in a lot of institutions, and all of us in medicine have witnessed an incredible amount of bad behavior, sexism, racism, homophobia. We in general, medicine is a very conservative culture. So things are shifting, and that's great. I think it's good to see if our standard is going up. Good.
So it's good that social mores have changed in terms of how we behave.
They have to. I mean, if I think about what medicine looked like then, even just what we knew from a scientific perspective, it's radically changed. When I think about the workplace, when I think about how the women in our field are treated based on the data still, we're just beginning to change. I mean, we're not even scratching the surface.
And social media has changed much of it in terms of behavior. But I want to reference another piece of data. When we asked, do physicians misbehave more in person or on social media? 47% said in person in a medical situation, 35% said on social media, even though in person was more than social media and is very concerning. What about the fact that people say, what, social media, it's my own business. It's my own profile. I'm not in the office. I can do what I want.
That depends on you as a healthcare professional. I was an early adopter of social media, starting on Twitter, then Facebook, then Instagram. And that's a question all of us who choose to be on social media, and that's an active choice you have to make as a physician and a healthcare provider. You set those boundaries. That said, I love that the conversation's going on, because I think for too long, the public has not viewed physicians as people. And that especially, I think about all of my colleagues, especially the parents who get viewed just as a physician. And that's what we're here for people for. But the notion that more of a physician's life is being opened up, that more medical students and residents are seeing, what it's really like to be an attending. I think that's good for us as a field. And so I love how social media is opening things up, is showing us more of what hospital-like life is like. It's inspiring our workforce to be more diverse. So yeah, things are shifting.
All right. But let's say you put up inappropriate pictures on social media as a physician, you're labeled as such. Does it diminish the profession?
Whenever a physician is behaving badly, not leading, not showing everyone around us that we are deep and thoughtful people, I think it hurts our profession. That said, I think we're also people. I think often we need to let off steam. I think that we have a long tradition in medicine of letting off steam in a variety of not so appropriate ways. So I think we have to learn.
Is that okay? Is that okay?
Well, I think what isn't okay, John, is as a field, we don't have alternatives. And I think that we need to help ourselves as a field, but we also need in our training to make sure that we're giving people tools. If having a drink and communing with colleagues, that's one of your ways to unwind, great. But we should somehow codify that a little bit more in medicine, that just as we have CME, just as we have our the standards that we adhere to for care, we also need to have a set of standards for self-care. And those are missing in medicine. And I think that's the worst behavior that I see. What the behavior that concerns me the most that isn't here, it's not about bullying. That's certainly concerning. That's always been part of medicine, unfortunately. But what concerns me is that the worst behavior we have in America today is physicians aren't taking care of themselves. And we see that in all kinds of different ways. Bad behavior is one of that.
I want to put a slide up. And the question was, did more women or men behave badly? And the respondents said 77% were men. What's your response to that?
My response is that we have a male mental health crisis in America that's been unattended to. Several of us have been trying to sound an alarm about that, and we're going to keep sounding that alarm. Well, that statistic is one of the many statistics that shows that 1 in 2 men have an alcohol use disorder. Male physicians are the top group at risk for suicide, period. So when I see that 77%, yeah, it's sad. Does it surprise me? No. Men engage in more externalizing behavior. Men struggle with alcohol. Men are really struggling with the shifting workplace. And there's just been a complete shattering of what has been a traditional source of, essentially white male power. And so medicine has really been slow to adapt to that in some ways, in a lot of ways. If you look at Christina Van Gurian's work, vice chair at UCSF, you see there's just still a tremendous amount.
But Dr. Ramsey, people are going to, listen to this and say, okay, but do you have any data that shows that behaving badly leads to bad outcomes? So, I can give examples where patients will say they went to see an orthopedic surgeon, not, the most fuzzy personality, but a great technician, right? And they were happy with that, despite some of the challenges of personality. So how do we judge to say misbehavior is actually causing bad outcomes in medicine?
Well, I think there's a difference between misbehavior and not being friendly. And I think that there's a difference between not being friendly and not being professional. And that being courteous, having a good bedside manner. Well, one of my colleagues here, a local hospitalist, Dr. Marcia Lux, I asked her kind of focus and expertise at this period of her career. And she said, the bedside. And it just really just sort of hit me in the heart of like such a nice thing to hear. And I think so many of you watching know that. And so you can be an expert technician, taciturn, not the friendliest person, and still look your patient in the eye and connect with them. And I think many of the physicians watching know that. That's not misbehavior. Misbehavior is when you treat those around you with disrespect, when you don't model the best values of medicine, that we are caring, we are loving, we are healing, we are generous and thoughtful, we listen. That's what it means to be a great doctor. And so, sure, to not do that is not misbehaving, but it's not doing what we all swore to do. And in my mind, you're not hitting the mark then. So
what do we do about it? We asked this question: should physicians face higher behavioral standards? And 66% said yes, they should. But what's interesting, Dr. Ramsey, that's a decrease in what it was the year previously. 77% said the previous year that they should face higher standards. Fewer people are saying that now.
Medicine and physicians are, I wouldn't even say we're in recovery. Every day I look at the New York Times and I think about all our colleagues around the country who've been at the bedside in some ICU, and 350 Americans still died yesterday from COVID. A lot of people, myself included, have talked about post-COVID going into recovery. We've got to recognize so many of our colleagues watching are manning the front lines of a horrible pandemic still. And so I think it's a hard time to ask that question. Can we do better? Can we do more? Because so many of our colleagues are burned out just getting by. So many institutions are struggling with staffing. We always need to do better. I think 100% of us should say that we need to do better in medicine. Our country continues to be in the midst of a horrible health and mental health care crisis.
Should we ever consider referring physicians who misbehave to medical boards for disciplinary action?
Well, I think for certain things, for sure, if we see repeated behaviors where people are violating one of the fundamental oaths of medicine, we see people who are abusing patients, we see doctors who are pill mills, we see people who aren't seeing patients and looking at their patients in the eye, digitally or otherwise. When we see people who repeatedly breaking the law and can't follow some of the basic rules of society, yes.
Well, given this data, given this report and what we've been talking about, what's the future of the physician workforce, the healthcare community workforce? Do you expect that we'll see more misbehavior as we continue to recover? Is it going to get worse before it gets better? What's your prediction, Dr. Ramsey?
I'm very hopeful. I think that we will have the strongest, smartest, most resilient, most well-trained workforce in the world when it comes to U.S. physicians. And I say that not as a lobbyist, but as a physician. It's a wonderful profession. I think that we are working so hard. I see so many of my colleagues around the country working so hard to make sure that our institutions are diverse, that make sure that there are appropriate vetting and questioning systems in place so people can have a voice. I think that in terms of disciplinary action, there's always been a lot of that in medicine. So, I would say this: if you're a colleague watching this who struggled with your behavior and suffered some consequences of that, it's an opportunity for you to shine and to improve and to grow. And it probably doesn't feel that way. I think for institutions, it's important to let us all know all of the things that you're doing to help physicians, not just to punish docs or catch misbehavior, but like to prevent that and to make sure there's a conversation going on to help us. There's a new landscape I think a lot of doctors are in some ways frightened of. A lot of doctors weren't raised or didn't come of age or haven't been professionals in an era where pronouns matter. And that why that is, there's a lot of strong opinions, but when it's your patient and it matters to them, it should matter to you. So there's a lot of new, I think, training and education to help us understand the difference between misbehavior and physicians being misinformed and needing to learn.
Well, Dr. Drew Ramsey, thank you as always for taking the time, helping us understand what's going on with our mind and our body, whether it's physicians or healthcare workers in general, or just, our everyday selves. You offer us good insight all the time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. It's a treat to be with you. And thank you for drawing our attention to this. It's easy to put our heads in the sand and ignore that everyone struggles with behavior, period. And that part of that and understanding our behavior is becoming a great physician. And so I really appreciate this conversation. And thank you again.